The moment I stepped into that tent, I stepped out of my real life and into a nightmare that I still haven't woken up from. I'm sitting here at 2 a.m. recording this because if I don't say it out loud, I'm going to start believing I made the whole thing up. You have to understand, up until 6 weeks ago, my life was organized. It was color-coded. It was safe. I'm Paloma Vreeland, principal of North Springs High School. I deal with budget cuts, angry parents, and the occasional vape pen in the boys' bathroom. I do not do this. I don't do mystery. I don't do psychics. And I certainly don't do the kind of chaotic, unscripted horror that is currently sitting on my kitchen table. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's table the horror for a second and go back to the beginning. To where the crack in the foundation actually appeared. It was a Tuesday, 6 weeks ago. The humidity in Georgia was sitting at about 90%. The kind of wet heat that feels like you're trying to breathe through a warm washcloth. I was at the North Georgia State Fair with my sister Zora. Now, Zora is the yin to my yang. She's crystals, chakras, and let's see where the wind takes us. I'm spreadsheets, strategic planning, and let's see where the schedule takes us. We were walking past the concession stands, the air smelling like a toxic mixture of deep-fried Oreos, livestock manure, and that distinct sugary scent of spun cotton candy. I remember wiping sweat off my forehead and checking my Apple Watch. It was 2015 p.m. I had a faculty meeting at 4 p.m. that I hadn't prepped for, and my anxiety was doing that thing where it feels like ants are crawling under your skin. I was ready to go, but Zora, she stopped dead in her tracks. She pointed a manicured finger at the small purple tent tucked between a taco stand and the tilt-a-whirl. "We have to go in there," she said. I looked at that tent. It looked like something out of a cheap movie. Heavy velvet curtains blocking out the sun, a flickering LED sign that just read Celeste in cursive letters. "Absolutely not," I told her. "I need to process the data on my quarterly reports, not have my palm read by a woman who likely lives in a van down by the river." But Zora, she can be persistent. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly tight, and dragged me toward the entrance. "You're too rigid, Paloma. You're closed off. The universe has a message for you." I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. The universe has a message? Did it send an email? Because I missed it. But I let her pull me inside. And the second I crossed that threshold, the noise, it just died. One step. And the screaming of the roller coaster, the bass-heavy thump of the fairground music, the shrieking children, all of it vanished. It was like someone hit the mute button on the world. It was dead silent. The air inside was cool, maybe 65 degrees, and it smelled heavy. Like patchouli and sage and something else. Something metallic. The only light came from these battery-operated fairy lights strung around the ceiling, casting long, weird shadows against the canvas walls. Sitting at a small round table covered in a dark, crushed velvet cloth was a woman. Celeste. She didn't look like a charlatan. She didn't have a crystal ball or a turban. She looked like somebody's grandmother. She looked up as we entered, and her eyes, I don't know how to describe it. It was like she was scanning me, reading a barcode on my forehead. She didn't ask for our money. She didn't ask for our names. She just closed her book, placed it gently on the table, and pointed to the chair opposite her. "Sit," she said. Her voice was raspy, like dry leaves. I hesitated. My internal alarm bells were ringing. This was ridiculous. I was a grown woman, an educator, but something about the silence in that tent, it felt heavy. It felt magnetic. It felt magnetic? I sat down. Zora stood in the corner, vibrating with excitement, like a golden retriever waiting for a treat. Celeste reached out and grabbed my hand before I could even blink. Her skin was dry, papery, and ice cold. She turned my hand over, palm up, and stared at the lines like she was reading a complex map. Then she looked up. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time in 20 years of marriage, I felt unsafe. I felt seen in a way that made my stomach drop. She stopped. The air in the tent seemed to thicken. The silence turned from peaceful to oppressive. She leaned in closer, the smell of incense choking me, and she looked me dead in the eye. She said, "Your husband has a voice he doesn't want you to hear. It's hidden in the red chest." I pulled my hand back like I'd been burned. "What?" I asked, my voice sounding thin and scared. "That doesn't track." He's an actuary. He doesn't have secrets. He has a 401k and a golf addiction. But she just sat there, staring at me, unblinking. And that's when I knew. That's when the first crack appeared. I walked out of that tent into the blinding Georgia sun, and I didn't recognize my own life. Look, when you spent 20 years managing teenagers, you develop a very specific radar for nonsense. You know that feeling when a student gives you an excuse that sounds technically possible but feels like wet cardboard? That's exactly how I felt leaving Celeste's tent. But instead of detention, I was facing an existential crisis about my marriage. I turned to Zora right there in the dirt of the fairgrounds, and I just lost it. I started laughing. It was that nervous, high-pitched laughter that sounds a little like a hyena choking. I said, a red chest, a voice, Zora, please tell me you didn't pay $50 for that. We walked out of the tent, and the Georgia humidity hit me like a physical weight. It was heavy, thick, smelled like funnel cake fryer oil and livestock. It was gross, and it was grounding. We were walking away from the mystical and right back into the mundane, and I needed that. I needed a minute to process the data without the smell of incense clouding my judgment. I told myself I was overthinking. I wasn't. But at that moment, I was 99% sure this was a cold reading trick. I started spinning theories before we even hit the pavement of the parking lot. I said, okay, think about it, a red chest. That's obvious, right? We had that cedar chest at the foot of the bed. The one his mother gave us. It's stained mahogany, but in bad lighting, it looks dark red. Maybe she saw a picture of our bedroom on Facebook. Or something. That tracks. That makes sense. And the voice? Maybe Desmond bought me a karaoke machine for my birthday and forgot about it. Or maybe he's hiding a vintage radio in there. I was grasping at straws, throwing logic at the wall to see what stuck, because the alternative that my boring, spreadsheet-loving husband of 2 decades was living a double life was just not in the syllabus. Zora, bless her heart, she was trying to be supportive, but she was also amused. She nudged me with her elbow and said, Paloma, if Desmond has a secret voice in a red chest, it's probably just him recording himself complaining about interest rates. And we both cracked up. We leaned against her Honda in the parking lot, sweating through our linen shirts, laughing at the absurdity of it all. I felt the tension draining out of my shoulders. I felt secure again. I felt like I was the one in control. The administrator, the one who handles the crises. Desmond isn't a mystery. Desmond is the guy who separates the recycling by plastic number 7. Desmond is the guy who falls asleep during action movies. He doesn't have voices in boxes. I pulled my phone out of my purse to text him. The screen was blindingly bright in the afternoon sun. I typed out, ready for pickup. The psychic was a trip. I hit send. I watched the little bubble pop up, and then the read receipt appeared instantly. 4:02 p.m. He saw it. I waited for the sarcastic reply. I waited for, did she tell you we're winning the lottery? Or I'm in the parking lot by the petting zoo. But my phone stayed silent. We waited there for 20 minutes. I checked my Apple Watch. I checked the signal strength. 5 bars. I wasn't worried. I was annoyed. I'm a busy woman. I have a budget meeting at 8 a.m. the next day. I don't have time to sit in a parking lot, baking in the sun while my husband takes a scenic route through the fair traffic. I texted again. Hello. Nothing. I remember looking at Zora and rolling my eyes so hard it actually hurt. I said, Men, he probably has his phone on Do Not Disturb and forgot to turn it off. We laughed again. We dismissed it. We dismissed the psychic. We dismissed the red chest. And we dismissed the silence on the other end of that text message. We packed ourselves into the car and cranked the AC, letting the cold air wash away the creepiness of the tent. I told myself the red chest was just a prop. I told myself the voice was just a metaphor for stress. I built myself a nice, comfortable fortress of denial, brick by brick. And I sat in that fortress, feeling safe and superior and utterly, completely wrong. I wish I had listened to the part about the voice, because the silence that followed was deafening. Zora dropped me off in the driveway, still giggling about the aura cleansing, and I walked into the house feeling resolved. I needed a minute to process the data, sure, but the logical conclusion was that I was just burnt out. Being the principal of North Springs High is enough to drive anyone to see a psychic, let alone believe one. I stepped into the kitchen, and the air was thick with the scent of Desmond's vanilla latte. He has this ritual every single afternoon at 4 p.m., like clockwork. Predictable. Stable. It was exactly the antidote I needed after the chaos of the fair. I told myself, Paloma, let's table this. You were looking for demons in a house that is thoroughly haunted by domestic bliss. I walked down the hallway to her bedroom, my eyes fixed on the foot of the bed. That cedar chest? The red chest. I stood there looking at it, and honestly, I felt silly. It's mahogany. Deep, rich, stained mahogany. In the dim light of the late afternoon, maybe it could look reddish-brown if you squinted hard enough, but it wasn't glowing. It wasn't radiating evil energy, it was just a chest. I knelt down and ran my hand along the lid. The wood was cool under my palm, smooth except for that one scratch near the handle from when we moved in 12 years ago. I lifted the lid just an inch. That smell? Cedar? Potpourri. Old blankets. I didn't hear a voice. I didn't feel a ghost. I just saw the pile of heavy wool throws we use for exactly 3 weeks a year in January. I slammed it shut. Case closed. Celeste was just a charlatan looking for a $50 bill from a stressed-out woman in a cardigan. Desmond came home around his usual time. I heard the garage door grinding open, that distinct metallic rumble that signals the end of the workday. He walked in, briefcase in one hand, a plastic grocery bag in the other. Khakis, polo shirt, that tired accountant look. He didn't look like a man hiding a dark secret. He looked like a man who wanted a burger. We sat at the kitchen island. He was heating up some leftovers, lasagna from Sunday, and he started talking about his day. He mentioned something about the new tax codes, which usually makes my eyes glaze over, but then he pivoted. He took a bite of garlic bread, chewed thoughtfully, and said, "Actually, I'm glad you're sitting down. I've been helping Jerry with his investment strategy. You know how he is with money. But I've been looking at these new crypto exchanges for him. It's fascinating, the volatility. High risk, but the yield is significant if you time it right." I remember just swirling my iced tea, listening to the ice clink against the glass. "Jerry? From the golf club? You're helping him with crypto?" I asked. I was teasing him, honestly. Desmond is the most fiscally conservative person I know. He still has a checkbook. He nodded, serious as a heart attack. "Someone has to, Paloma. He's going to lose his shirt if I don't show him the data. I've been staying up late reading the white papers. It's complex, but I think I've found a pattern." I laughed. I actually laughed. "Okay, Warren Buffett, just make sure you don't lose your own shirt in the process." He smiled this small, tight smile and went back to his lasagna. "Don't worry, I've got it under control. It's just..." Yun ran. We watched TV for the rest of the evening. The house was quiet, save for the low hum of the central air fighting the Georgia humidity. Everything felt so aggressively normal. The routine is my safety blanket. The coffee, the news, the predictable way he loads the dishwasher. I went to bed feeling like I had dodged a bullet. I had let my anxiety invent a problem that didn't exist. That's not in the syllabus for a happy marriage, is it? Paranoia. But around 2 a.m., I woke up. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2014 a.m. in harsh red numbers. I was thirsty. My mouth felt like sandpaper. I threw the covers off and padded out into the hallway. The house was dark, shadows stretching long across the floorboards. As I walked past the door that leads to the garage, I stopped. The door wasn't closed all the way. There was a sliver of light cutting through the darkness. Pale yellow. I assumed Desmond was out there. Sometimes he can't sleep, and he goes out to tinker with his golf clubs or organize the workbench. I was about to push the door open and ask him to grab me a water bottle from the extra fridge, but my hand froze on the doorknob. Because through that crack in the door, I didn't hear the clink of metal tools. I didn't hear the rumble of the deep freezer. I heard a voice. It was Desmond. But it wasn't his normal speaking voice. It was low, a whisper. Intense. Hushed. He wasn't talking to me. He wasn't on the phone with the telemarketer. He was murmuring, fast and frantic, like he was afraid the walls themselves were listening. I stood there in the hallway, my bare feet cold against the hardwood, and realized that the silence I had found in the cedar chest was a lie. The chest wasn't the problem. The problem was whatever was happening on the other side of that garage door. He whispered, "No, no, you have to trust me. I can fix the ledger." I stood there for a full minute, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Then, slowly, I backed away. I didn't open the door. I didn't ask for water. I went back to bed, pulled the covers up to my chin, and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. And that's when I knew normalcy is just a facade you paint over the rot. There is a specific kind of performance art involved in being a high school principal. You have to walk through the hallways projecting absolute authority, while internally calculating how much coffee you need to survive a budget meeting. That was me this morning, walking into my own kitchen, pretending I didn't know my husband was potentially a criminal. Desmond was standing by the island, slicing a grapefruit with a precision that felt aggressive. He looked up, smiled that same smile he gave me at our wedding, and asked if I slept well. I lied. I said, like a log. I'm not proud of it, but I needed to gather data before I made an accusation. You don't expel a student based on a rumor. You need the smoking gun. I grabbed my briefcase, making a show of checking my watch, and told him I left something in the car. The truth was, I needed to see the garage. The door from the kitchen to the laundry room creaked, and I stepped into the mudroom. The air coming from under the garage door was cooler than the house, smelled of wet concrete and gasoline, and yard work. But today it just smelled like a secret. I pushed the door open just a few inches, just enough to see. Desmond was there, but he wasn't sorting tools or looking for golf clubs. He was standing in the center of the concrete floor near the freezer, where we keep the backup frozen peas. He was talking, low, urgent whispers. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pleading. He looked like a lawyer who just lost his biggest case. He was holding his iPad in one hand, tapping it frantically with the other. But his eyes were darting around the room like he expected the SWAT team to come crashing through the ceiling. Then he saw me. The door hinge must have given me away. He jumped and slapped the iPad against his chest. It was a defensive move, pure and simple. Paloma, you scared me. He was sweating. Not, I've been working in the yard sweating. It was a cold, slick sheen on his forehead. His pupils were blown wide. He looked like a freshman I caught behind the bleachers with a jewel. I asked him what he was doing. He laughed, but it sounded brittle, like dry leaves snapping. He said, just watching a video on crypto. Jerry sent me a link. It's technical. Technical. I looked at the iPad screen. It was black. That doesn't track. You don't sweat through a polo shirt watching a black screen. I asked him what the video was about. He fumbled with the case, his thumb slipping on the fingerprint sensor. He wiped a bead of sweat from his temple with the back of his hand. I'll be inside in a minute. You have to be kidding me. He thinks I'm stupid. I walked away, but I didn't go to the car. I went to the home office and logged into my laptop. We have a Nest camera in the garage, pointed at the workbench. I scrolled back. The footage is grainy, black and white night vision, but it's clear enough. There he was, 2014 a.m. Pacing, back and forth. He was holding something else. It was dark, matte black, a rectangle. Too thick to be his iPhone. I was watching the playback, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, when I realized I was hearing a noise in real time. A car door slamming, Desmond leaving. I minimized the feed and looked out the window. He was walking to his car. He stopped at the edge of the driveway. He looked back at the house, and then he put something in his pocket. Fast. Too fast. He didn't come back until the next afternoon, Thursday. I was sitting at the kitchen island trying to grade AP history essays, focusing on the causes of the Great Depression, while my own personal economic collapse was looming large. Desmond walks in, keys jingling, looking way too pleased with himself. He drops a plastic blister pack on the granite countertop. No Apple logo. No sleek white box. Just this cheap, crinkly packaging that smelled like industrial plastic. I looked at it. I looked at him. What is that? Oh, work upgrade, he says, so casual. IT is finally phasing out the old iPhones. Cost-cutting measure. Going to prepaid carriers for the field team. I picked up the phone. It was heavy, dense, a matte black phone, a Samsung Galaxy J3, I think it was, the kind of phone you buy in a checkout aisle at a Walmart at midnight with cash. And the screen protector? Already had a hairline crack running right through the corner. That doesn't track. Who issues a damaged phone to an employee? Then he hits me with the other shoe. Actually, it's perfect timing. I ordered that gaming laptop yesterday. The high-end Alienware rig. It's coming tomorrow. I'm gonna get serious about PC gaming, Coloma. I need a dedicated line for the servers, so the work stuff doesn't lag. Desmond, my husband, the man who thinks gaming is playing solitaire on his iPad while watching PBS. Now he's a PC gamer? I needed a minute to process the data. A burner phone and a $3,000 gaming laptop in the same 48-hour period. This wasn't a midlife crisis, this was an armament. He goes into the downstairs bathroom to wash up. I hear the water running. My hand moved before my brain even registered the movement. I snatched my iPhone off the counter, snapped a picture of that cheap plastic brick sitting next to my half-eaten grapefruit. Flash off. Silent mode. I zoomed in on the photo. The timestamp on the screensaver was 4:20 p.m. It was already set up, already active. The toilet flushed, the sink cut off. He walked back into the kitchen, drying his hands on a dish towel, and he saw me looking at the photo on my screen. His face changed. The pleasant mask slipped right off. "Are you taking pictures of my stuff now?" he asked. His voice was low, cold. Not the Desmond I know. "Just updating the insurance inventory," I said. "A lie. I'm a terrible liar." He slammed the towel down on the counter. "You need to stop digging, Paloma. You have been acting absolutely paranoid since we went to that stupid fair. You sound exactly like your sister. Zora and her conspiracy theories, is that what this is? Are you two talking about me?" He leaned in close. I could smell the spearmint gum he was chewing. To cover up something else. "Nobody is doing anything to you. You're the principal of a high school. Act like it. Stop acting like a hysterical teenager." He walked out, leaving the burner phone sitting there. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, thick. I looked at the phone, then at the doorway where he disappeared. The fear was still there, sitting in my stomach like a cold stone. But something else was rising up underneath it. Hot, sharp. I wasn't paranoid. I was a principal, and I knew how to spot a liar when I saw one. After Desmond peeled out of the driveway, leaving a cloud of burnt rubber and diesel smoke in his wake, I stood there in the mudroom. I was holding that cheap Samsung Galaxy J3. My hands were shaking so badly the plastic casing rattled against the granite countertop. I knew right then I couldn't be in that house alone. The air felt heavy, like the late August humidity was pressing in on me. I grabbed my purse, threw that burner phone into a side pocket like it was contraband, and got in the car. I didn't even think about it. I just dialed Zora. I just said Starbucks on Roswell Road. Now, I need a latte and a witness. Zora was already at a corner table when I walked in. She had her giant iced oat milk latte extra shot, obviously, and she was grading papers. She looked up and saw my face. She took one look at me and swept the AP history essays into her bag. She knows me. She knows that when my jaw sets like that, we are not discussing curriculum. We are in crisis mode. I sat down. The chair squeaked. The barista was in the back grinding beans. This high-pitched mechanical whine. The place smelled like burnt coffee and cinnamon, which usually comforts me, but today it just smelled like lies. I pulled the track phone out of my pocket and slid it across the table. It hit the wood with a dull, heavy thud. "Desmond left this," I said. My voice sounded thin, reedy. Not like a principal at all. Like a scared kid. Zora looked at it. She frowned. She picked it up, turned it over in her manicured hand. "That's not his work iPhone." "No," I said. "It's a burner, a track phone, a Samsung J3. He claims he bought it for, I don't know, gaming? Because suddenly he's a PC gamer at 52? Please, that doesn't track." Zora stared at the screen. The crack in the protector caught the fluorescent light. And he just left it? He forgot it. Or he got spooked. I caught him with a laptop, that Alienware monstrosity. He panicked, shoved past me, and left us sitting right on the kitchen island, right next to the fruit bowl. We sat there for a minute, I watched the condensation drip down Zora's cup. I felt like I was going to throw up vanilla latte all over the table. I needed a minute to process the data. My husband, my boring, spreadsheet-obsessed husband, has a secret phone. You know, Zora said, tapping her nail against the cheap plastic case. This changes the narrative. It takes it from midlife crisis to felony territory. Yeah, I said. I checked the cedar chest. The one at the foot of the bed? That red chest Celeste talked about at the fair? I tore it apart this morning. Nothing but wool throws and that smell of cedar that gives me a headache. Zora froze. Her hand stopped midair. Her cup was halfway to her lips. She looked at me over the rim of her tortoiseshell glasses. Her expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror. The cedar chest, she said slowly. Paloma. The cedar chest is mahogany. It's brown. It's stained wood. Why are you calling it a red chest? I assumed, I stammered. I felt stupid because of the lighting or the cloth inside. I don't know. It felt like the only chest in the house. Zora put her cup down. Hard, a little sloshed out onto the saucer. It's not the only chest. Think about the garage. Think about where Desmond spends all his time when he's not helping Jerry with crypto. Think about the Nest footage. My brain did that thing where it flashes images like a slideshow. The garage, the freezer, the pale yellow light at 2014 a.m., and then the image snapped into focus with terrifying clarity. The toolbox, I whispered. Not just a toolbox, Zora said, her eyes wide and locked on mine. The red Craftsman toolbox, the heavy one, the one with the rollers. And suddenly the air left the room. I remembered that day 6 weeks ago at the North Georgia State Fair. I remembered Celeste, the psychic, leaning over that crushed velvet table. I could smell the incense and the dampness of the fairgrounds again. She had said he keeps the voice in a red chest. I thought she meant the toy box in the attic. I thought she meant the cedar chest. I was looking for furniture. I was looking for blankets. I wasn't looking for tools. The toolbox. It was bright, industrial red. It sat right there in the corner of the garage between the freezer and the workbench. I'd seen him open it 1,000 times, but I'd never looked inside. Whenever I got close, he'd close it. Fast. Paloma? Zora's voice brought me back. You okay? I wasn't okay. I was remembering the excuses. Careful, Paloma. Those tools are sharp. Don't mess with the setup. I have things calibrated. You don't understand, honey. You'll scratch the finish. I never touched it, I said. The horror creeping up my throat like bile. The toolbox. He never let me touch that toolbox. It's dangerous, sharp tools, he'd say. But you know what? If it's just wrenches and hammers, why does he need a key for the middle drawer? I practically ran out of the Starbucks on Roswell Road, leaving half an iced oat milk latte sweating on the table. I didn't care about the caffeine anymore. I had a burner phone in my purse that felt like it was radiating heat, and a riddle to solve. I got into my car and the doors closed with that heavy thud, sealing me in the silence. I pulled out my iPhone and pulled up the Life 360 app. I needed a minute to process the data. It was his avatar, a little gray Honda Civic icon, stationary. He was parked at the Macon Marriott, just like he said he'd be for his conference. The timestamp said he'd been there for 45 minutes. Safe, or safe for me to proceed. He wasn't coming back to Sandy Springs for at least 4 hours. That's 4 hours of instructional time, people. That is an eternity in the life of a panicked principal. The drive home was a blur of manicured lawns and traffic lights that I swear were conspiring against me. Every red light felt like an interrogation. I kept glancing at the passenger seat where I'd tossed my purse, expecting the burner phone to suddenly ring or explode. It didn't. It just sat there, a black brick of silent accusation. I pulled into the driveway, hitting the garage remote before I even put the car in park. The door rattled up, that familiar metal-on-metal grinding sound, but today it sounded like a cage opening. I stepped out of the AC and into the wall of humidity. It was mid-September in Georgia, so the air was thick enough to chew. But there was another smell, too. Oil, old motor oil, sawdust, and the metallic tang of cold steel. It was the smell of secrets. I walked past the dryer, past the stacks of recycling bins we never take out, right to the far corner. And there it was, the red chest. Celeste said it held a voice, and she wasn't wrong, but my brain had gone to Victorian furniture, to romance, to something soft. This wasn't soft. It was a heavy industrial-grade Craftsman rolling toolbox. It was a deep, glossy red, the kind of color that looks great in a showroom but terrifying in your garage. When you realize your husband is a liar, I remembered every time he'd steered me away from it. Paloma, don't mess with the torque wrenches, they're calibrated. Honey, grab the screwdriver from the kitchen drawer. The garage tools are greasy. He was protecting the middle drawer, the one with the key. I stood there in the semi-darkness, the garage door casting long shadows across the concrete floor. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, like a drum solo at a rock concert. I was terrified of what I was going to find. Would it be cash? Fake passports? A gun? Or worse, phones? Hundreds of phones? I felt like I was standing outside the principal's office waiting for the verdict on my own life. I reached out a hand and my fingers brushed the cold metal handle. It was freezing. And then I did it. I opened the latch, it was cold, and there it was. So, I'm standing in the garage. The air is thick, smelling of gasoline, and that metallic tang of old tools. It's quiet, except for the refrigerator humming inside the house. I just opened the latch of the red Craftsman toolbox. I'm looking down and, honestly, I'm expecting to find nothing. I'm expecting to find a bunch of rusty sockets and realize I've gone completely off the rails. That I'm the crazy one. But that isn't what I found. I lifted the top tray out. Usually it's heavy, rattling with torque wrenches and Allen keys. But today it felt light. Suspiciously light. I set it on the concrete floor and looked into the main compartment. It was filled with rags. Greasy, grimy shop rags that smelled like motor oil and Desmond's hands. I reached in. The fabric was rough, abrasive against my fingertips. I started digging, moving the oily cloth aside, my heart rate climbing with every inch I went deeper, and then my hand hit something hard. Plastic. Smooth. I pulled it out. It was wrapped in a towel, and not just any rag. This was one of the good Williams-Sonoma dish towels from our wedding registry, the ones with the paisley pattern we were never actually supposed to use for cleaning up grease. I unwrapped the folds carefully. The fabric felt expensive, starkly out of place in this greasy metal box. And there it was. Another phone, but this wasn't the truck phone I found in the bathroom last week. This was an ancient dinosaur, a Samsung Galaxy, maybe an S5 or an S6. The back was completely covered in silver duct tape, peeling at the corners like dead skin. It looked like a bomb component. It looked like evidence from an episode of Forensic Files. I pressed the power button. The screen stayed black. Of course it did. Why would it be charged? But then, buried underneath the rags, I saw a charging cable. I jammed it into the port. I stood there in the gathering gloom of the garage, watching a black screen, praying for a flicker of life. I felt like a thief in my own home, a criminal violating the privacy of a man I've slept next to for 20 years. 45 seconds. That's how long it took. The screen lit up. A white battery icon appeared in the center. It had 10% charge. It asked for a PIN. I froze. What was the code? Was it his birthday? Our address? The PIN for the debit card we never use? And then, just like a muscle memory, the numbers came to me. 0524, May 24th, our anniversary, the date on the cake at our wedding, the date engraved on the inside of my ring. I typed it in. 0524. I held my breath. The keypad vanished. The phone unlocked. I was staring at the home screen. It was barren. No widgets, no apps, just a generic stock photo of a mountain range as the wallpaper. Not a picture of me. Not a picture of our kids at graduation. Just a cold, impersonal landscape he downloaded to hide who he really is. Up in the top left corner, a little notification popped up. No SIM service. That doesn't track. Why have a phone with no SIM card? Unless he only puts one in when he needs to make a call. Unless he swaps them out like clothes. My brain was doing that thing where it tries to rationalize the impossible. Maybe it was an old phone. Maybe he just used it as an MP3 player. No. The tape. The hidden location inside the Williams-Sonoma towel. That wasn't for music. That was for secrets. The light from the screen cast a ghostly blue glow on my face. I looked at the icons. There was no Instagram, no Facebook, No email, just the green icon for messages, and a browser, and a calculator. It was a ghost machine. I didn't check the browser history. I didn't check the photos. I was terrified of what I'd see, but I knew I had to look. My thumb hovered over the green bubble. This was it, the point of no return. If I opened this, I couldn't pretend Desmond was just a guy who liked crypto. I couldn't pretend we were just going through a rough patch. I went straight to the messages, and my stomach hit the floor. My thumb actually shook. Just a little tremor right there on the glass. I pressed the green messages icon. The screen loaded with this agonizing slowness. You know that feeling when the internet is buffering and you just need to see the answer? The garage was stifling, even with the door half open, and I could hear the neighbor's lawnmower 2 houses down. This rhythmic, absurdly normal sound. My entire life was disintegrating, and then the list populated. I wasn't looking at one thread, I was looking at a manifest. A roster. There wasn't just one name. There were dozens. I scrolled and the names just kept jumping out at me. Sunshine G. Graham, Martha, 1952. Eileen G. in Unsca. These weren't the names of college sophomores. They were grandmothers, the profile pictures, cats, flower gardens, sunsets. I started reading and my stomach turned over so hard I thought I was going to be sick right there on the garage floor. I clicked on the thread for Sunshine Dram. Her real name was Dorothy. I saw the last message sent at 11:42 a.m. that morning. It read, "My darling wife, I am counting the seconds until I can hold you again. My darling wife, I'm standing here, legally his wife of 20 years, and he's calling a stranger in Florida his wife." It was grotesque. It was a violation. I scrolled up a little further, looking for the transaction. There it was, the classic setup. He wrote, "I just need $2,000 for the flight to come see you. The bank is holding my funds due to the audit, but I'll pay you back." He needed the money. He needed their savings. I recognized the syntax immediately, that specific mix of professional jargon and romantic hyperbole. The audit, the ledger. He was using the same excuses he fed me to scam them. I backed out and opened Martha 1952. Same script. "My love, my dearest heart." He was talking about needing a new laptop for his contracting work in Dubai. Dubai just hasn't left Georgia in 3 years. I had to put the phone down. On the workbench. I needed a minute to process the data. My brain was doing that thing where it tries to reject the input because the truth is too catastrophic to fit into the existing file system. This wasn't an affair. An affair is about passion, about mistakes, about human connection gone wrong. This was cold. This was calculated. I looked at the sheer volume of text bubbles. Green, gray, green, gray. Thousands of words, thousands of promises. He was managing these women like a portfolio. I could almost see the spreadsheet in his head. ROI on Dorothy? Potential yield on Martha? I felt like I was standing in the middle of a graveyard where the headstones were bank accounts. I picked the phone back up, my hands sweating so much the screen was getting slick. I realized then that the psychic, Celeste, was right. There was a voice in the red chest, but it wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus of victims he was silencing. And my husband? The man who helps me grade AP history essays on Sundays? He wasn't cheating. He was hunting them. I was standing there in the garage, surrounded by the smell of motor oil and sawdust, holding this phone that felt radioactive. My hands were actually shaking, like physically vibrating, and I knew I had to secure this evidence before the battery died. Or Desmond came home earlier. I completely lost my mind. I pulled out my own iPhone with my other hand, my thumb barely cooperating, and started taking screenshots. One after another, Martha 1952, Sunshine Dram, Eileen, Unstark in Dran, Eileen Unstark in a digital trail before he could factory reset this thing and erase everything. The battery icon on the Samsung showed 14%. I had maybe 20 minutes, max. I kept scrolling, trying to organize the chaos in my head. That's when I found the Notes app. I almost skipped it. Who looks at notes on a burner phone, right? But something made me tap it. And there it was, a folder, just sitting there with this innocent little folder icon. The folder was labeled Scripts. I felt cold all over. Not like air conditioning cold. Like grave cold. I tapped the folder and saw 6 notes inside. Script Sunshine Uska Final. Script Unlean Stage 3. Script Martha Final. My stomach hit the floor. These were just random notes. These were literal playbooks. I opened Script Nartha Mercer Final, and I swear to you I had to sit down on the concrete. Right there on the garage floor. Because what I was looking at, it wasn't a message. It was a flowchart. It was psychological warfare. The timestamp showed it had been created 3 weeks ago and updated yesterday. If she says she's lonely, pivot to childhood memories. Ask about her mother. Validate her grief. Make her feel heard. If she mentions money problems, pivot to urgent investment opportunity. Use the word portfolio. Mention Warren Buffett by name. Establish urgency. This window closes tomorrow at 5 p.m. EST. If she hesitates, deploy health concern. I haven't been sleeping well. The stress is giving me migraines. Make her feel guilty for your suffering. I stared at the words. These were human emotions being treated like variables in an equation. Desmond, my Desmond, the man who brought me soup when I had the flu last winter. The man who cried at our niece's wedding, had written this. He had sat down and carefully engineered ways to manipulate lonely women into handing over their retirement savings. My brain was doing that thing where it tries to reject reality because it's too painful to process. I told myself, maybe this is research, maybe he's writing a book, maybe. No, that doesn't track. You don't research emotional abuse by practicing it on real people. I went back to the main note screen, and that's when I saw it. A note at the bottom of the list, not in the scripts folder, standing alone with its own little icon. The note was named Wife. I remember swallowing hard. My throat felt like I'd swallowed sandpaper. A million questions racing through my head. What could he possibly have written about me? Our marriage? Our life together? Is this where he documented all my flaws? All the times I annoyed him? I should have stopped right there. I should have taken the phone, locked it in the safe, and called Zora. But I didn't. Of course I didn't, because once you start pulling at a loose thread, it can't stop until the whole sweater unravels. I took a deep breath. The air in the garage tasted metallic. Then I opened the file named Wife. My thumb was literally hovering over the screen, trembling like a freshman asking for a bathroom pass during a pop quiz. I'd braced myself. I really did. I thought I was going to find a dossier on my faults. You know, a Paloma problem list. Maybe text to a mistress complaining that I snore or that I nag him about the utility bills. I thought I was going to find out that he wanted to leave me. That would have been painful, sure. That would have been a tragedy, but it would have been human. It would have made sense in the context of a marriage falling apart. That tracks, right? People fall out of love. It happens. I see it in the parents of my students every single day. But what I saw, it wasn't about love or hate. It was colder than that. It was strategic. I tapped the wife file. The screen buffered for a second spinning circle of death, and then it opened. It wasn't a document, it was a photo gallery. The first image that loaded was me. Just me. I'm standing at the kitchen island in our house. I'm wearing that oversized navy blue sweatshirt I bought on clearance at Target 3 years ago. I remember the exact moment this was taken. It was a Tuesday evening, late last October. I was chopping vegetables for that lentil soup Desmond pretends to like. I remember I was humming. I felt safe. I felt domestic. I felt like the wife of a boring, reliable accountant. But the photo was cropped in a way that didn't show the kitchen. It showed me looking distracted, holding a glass of iced tea. And underneath the photo, there wasn't a caption like, "My beautiful wife." There was a draft message. A script. It read, "My wife Paloma is so cold about money. She's frozen the credit cards again. I'm trapped here, Martha. You're the only warmth I have." I felt the blood drain out of my face so fast I actually got dizzy. I had to grab the edge of the workbench to keep from falling over. The smell of oil and rubber in the garage suddenly turned my stomach. I scrolled to the next one. It's a picture of me in the garden. I'm on my knees, pulling weeds from the flower bed under the living room window. I'm wearing that ridiculous straw sun hat Zora bought me as a joke for my 50th birthday. I'm laughing at something Desmond must have said. In the photo, I look happy. I look like a woman who is loved. The draft text below it said, "She controls every penny." I can't even buy a plane ticket to come see you without her signature. She doesn't understand us, Dorothy. She's never had a passion like ours. That doesn't track. That doesn't track. I don't control the money. We have joint accounts. We share everything. Or I thought we did, but to Martha and Dorothy, to these lonely, vulnerable women sitting in their houses in Florida or Atlanta, I was the villain. I was the monster. I was the reason the man they loved, the man who was whispering sweet nothings into their ears, couldn't access his millions to pay for his emergency surgery or his stolen wallet. I realized right there in the dim light of the garage that the second voice Celeste warned me about wasn't a mistress. It was me. Or rather, it was a fictional version of me. Desmond had created a character named Paloma to star in his little melodramas. He needed an antagonist. He needed a reason why a wealthy international investor was always broke and always needed their help. And then it hit me. The photos. He wasn't taking these because he loved me. He was taking them for inventory. He was building a portfolio of trust markers. He was sending these women candid photos of me to prove he was the family man. See? Here is my cold, unloving wife. Here is my domestic life. I am real. You can trust me. I looked at the time stamp on the garden photo. It was taken 3 weeks ago. I remember that day. He came outside, kissed me on the forehead, took the photo, and said, "You look beautiful today, Poe." I had smiled and told him to stop being cheesy. I thought he was being a good husband. I thought he was cherishing a moment. He wasn't cherishing anything. He was loading the gun. He was taking ammunition. He was weaponizing my smile, my garden, my sweatshirt, my life. He was weaponizing my existence to steal from widows. He was weaponizing my existence to steal from widows. I put the phone down on the greasy shop rag for a second. I actually thought I was going to pass out. The room was spinning concrete floor, the red Craftsman box, the cobwebs in the corner. And I had to focus on the sharp smell of gasoline and motor oil just to anchor myself in reality. I'm a school principal. I deal with truancy and vaping in the bathrooms and budget cuts, not whatever this Rico level nightmare was, but I couldn't stay on the floor. I had a job to do. I picked the Samsung back up, my hands leaving damp smudges on the screen, and I swiped away from the scripts. I didn't need to read any more fiction. I needed the receipts. I tapped the Venmo icon. It opened instantly, and the sheer volume of transactions hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just one or two lonely widows sending a $50 birthday gift. This was a high-yield operation. I scrolled back, and the dates went all the way to 22 months ago. There were payments from Eileen Insquirt in Atlanta for $300, a payment from Martha, 1952, for $1,200. The memos were killing me softly. For the contracting materials, one read. To help with the audit, said another, because she won't let me use the cards. That last one, that was me. He was using my reputation as the money-hating wife to squeeze them dry. I felt like I was going to vomit, but I swallowed it down. I needed the data. And then I saw the big one, a transaction from Dorothy Unskay M. $5,000. $5,000 from a woman living on a fixed income in Florida. The memo line made the bile rise in my throat so hard I tasted it. It said, "For your flight, sweet Desmond, come see me soon." He was taking their travel money. He was taking their savings for flights he was never going to take. I did the math in my head, adding up the columns like I was balancing the school's fiscal year budget. 500 here, 2,000 there, little maintenance fees and emergency transfers. When I finally tallied it up, the number was so staggering I actually said it out loud in the empty garage. $196,000. Over 2 years, my husband had scammed these women out of nearly $200,000. I felt cold. Not the chill of the garage, but a deep internal freeze. I tapped on one of the deposits to see where the money went. It didn't go into our joint checking account at Chase. It didn't go to our savings for the roof repairs. It went to a digital wallet. A crypto exchange account I had never seen before in my life. It was a cold wallet, anonymous, untraceable unless you had the keys. He was siphoning their life savings into digital ether right under my nose while I was grading AP history essays at the kitchen island. He wasn't just a liar. He wasn't just a cheater. He was a predator, a thief. And he was doing it using my image, using my existence as the shield he hid behind. I looked at the battery icon in the top right corner. 3%. A red warning bar blinked at me like a heartbeat. I didn't have time for a breakdown. I needed to preserve this. I needed to make sure that when the police came, they couldn't say I imagined it. I couldn't let him spin this like he was helping them or that it was some misunderstanding. I needed to call the police, but first I had to document everything. I sat there on the cold concrete floor of the garage, surrounded by Desmond's precious Craftsman toolboxes, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The battery icon on that Samsung was blinking red at me, a pulsating warning light that said I had maybe 10 minutes left before this whole ghost machine went dark forever. I couldn't risk that. I needed the data. I needed the receipts. I pulled my iPad out of my bag, my hands shaking so bad the case rattled against the floor. I felt like a student who forgot to study for the final, realizing too late that the syllabus was a lie. I started snapping photos, not with my iPhone, but with the iPad, because I needed the higher resolution. I needed every pixel of those Venmo transactions to be crisp. I went through the history. We're talking 22 months of theft. October 12th, $500 from Sunshine Dram, memo for the flight to see you. That doesn't track. Desmond hasn't been on a plane since our honeymoon in Cancun. November 3rd, $2,200 from Martha 1952. Memo, contracting materials in Dubai. You have to be kidding me. The man hasn't left Georgia in 3 years. He was sitting in our home office, probably wearing those fleece pajama pants I hate, telling some poor woman in Ohio he needed money for cement in the Middle East. I kept scrolling. The numbers started to blur together, thousands of dollars trickling into a crypto wallet ID that looked like alphabet soup. But then I saw a name that made me stop. Martha 1952 had sent the most, over $12,000 in increments of $500 and $1,000. It was a slow bleed. I opened a separate browser tab on my iPad, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I typed her name into Facebook. I told myself I wouldn't find her, that she was just a bot, a fake profile, a figment of his algorithm. But she was there. The profile picture was a woman in her 70s, sitting on a porch swing with a fluffy white cat. Her cover photo was a generic picture of a beach at sunset. Her last post was 3 days ago, sharing a recipe for peach cobbler. She was real. She was a grandmother. She was a person. And my husband was bleeding her dry. I needed a minute to process the data. I stared at her smiling face, realizing that to her, Desmond was probably a dashing architect or a grieving widower who just needed a little help to access his inheritance. She wasn't a mark to me anymore. She was a victim, and I was sleeping next to the predator. The garage was silent except for the low hum of the freezer, but my ears were ringing. I created a new folder on my Google Drive. I named Evidence Shady. Very clinical, very administrative. I started uploading the photos. Script, Martha, square, final. Venmo, Umsty, history up to 22. Trust, markers, votos. I was building a case file. I was the principal, and I was about to expel the worst student I'd ever seen. My hands were sweating so much the screen kept smudging. I wiped them on my jeans, leaving dark streaks on the denim. I took a picture of the crypto wallet ID one last time, making sure the characters were legible. The battery on the burner was at 2%. It was now or never. I had to be surgical. I navigated back to the home screen, cleared the recent apps history, and powered it down. The screen went black. The silence in the garage suddenly felt very loud. I took the Williams-Sonoma dish towel, the Paisley one, the one we got for our wedding, and I wrapped the phone back up exactly as I'd found it. I placed it in the middle of the greasy shop rags, tucked the charging cable under the edge, and closed the lid of the red Craftsman toolbox. It had to look undisturbed. It had to look like a secret still safe. I stood up, my knees popping, and looked around the garage. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the driveway. I had to go inside. I had to start dinner. I had to look that man in the eye and pretend I didn't have a folder on my cloud that could send him to prison for the rest of his life. I put the phone back exactly as I found it. I had to act normal. I closed the heavy interior door, shutting the garage and its secrets away, and leaned back against the wood paneling. The silence in the kitchen was aggressive. The house felt different, smaller, like a stage set that had been stripped of its backdrop. I could still smell the faint, metallic scent of the toolbox, and that greasy shop rag on my hands, even though I'd scrubbed them. I looked at the clock on the microwave. 6:52 p.m. The sun was dipping below the tree line, casting long, stretching shadows across the floor that looked like claw marks. I needed a minute to process the data, but I didn't have a minute. Through the window over the sink, I saw the headlights sweep across the driveway, the familiar, uneven hum of the Honda's engine. My heart didn't race, it stalled like a car with a bad starter, then roared to life. I had to put on the mask. I had to be the principal. I had to be the wife. I moved to the stove on autopilot. I turned the burner knob to medium-high and grabbed the package of chicken thighs from the fridge. The plastic wrap crinkled too loudly in the quiet room. I heard the key in the deadbolt, the sharp click and heavy thud of the door opening. Desmond walked in. He looked tired. He looked like the man I'd been married to for 20 years, wearing that navy polo shirt that was starting to fray at the collar. He dropped his keys in the ceramic bowl on the entry table. The sound was a gunshot in the silence. He looked at me, standing there with raw chicken in one hand and tongs in the other, and he smiled. A small, tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. He had no idea. He thought he was walking into his fortress. He thought he was safe. "Hey," he said. His voice was casual, disgustingly casual. "Good trip?" I watched him. I really watched him. Like I was observing the student in detention who claimed he didn't have the contraband in his backpack. I could see the grease smudge near his temple. I could see the way his shoulders slumped, but not from exhaustion from the release of tension. He'd been hunting. He'd been working his portfolio. And now he was home to rest. "Yeah," I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from a tunnel. "It was fine. How was Macon?" He let out a long breath, opening the fridge to grab a Poland Spring water bottle. Long. "Jerry is... I don't know." He's in over his head with the ledger. I spent 4 hours trying to untangle his crypto inputs. "I'm telling you, it's a mess." I turned back to the pan. The olive oil was starting to shimmer, rippling like heat haze. "Jerry," I repeated, "you've been helping him a lot lately." "He needs me," Desmond said, and there was a note of pride in his voice that made my stomach turn over. He actually liked playing the savior, the hero of his own little tragedy. Not everyone has the head for this kind of strategic investment, Paloma. You know that. Paloma, you know that. I threw the chicken into the pan. It hissed and screamed, spattering hot oil onto my wrist. I didn't flinch. I just stared at the searing meat. Strategic investment. Is that what he called stealing Martha's retirement savings? Was that the corporate euphemism for bilking Dorothy out of $5,000? That doesn't track. I seasoned the meat. Salt, pepper, paprika. The motions were therapeutic, mechanical. I focused on the physics of the cooking. I could not think about the scripts. I could not think about the photo of me in the garden being used as a prop. He came up behind me. I stiffened. I felt the air pressure change as he leaned in. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me back against his chest. He nuzzled his face into my neck, inhaling deeply. "God, I missed you," he whispered. "It's so stressful being the only one who understands the math. It's lonely." I stood there, frozen, holding the tongs like a weapon. His touch felt wrong. It felt foreign. It felt like a snake coiling around my ankle. Every cell in my body was screaming at me. To drop the metal utensil, to scream, to smash the plate of chicken onto the floor and expose him. But I didn't. I dissociated. I floated up to the ceiling and looked down at us, a normal suburban couple cooking dinner in Sandy Springs. It looked perfect. It was a rotting corpse painted with makeup. He squeezed my waist and let go, moving to the island to check his phone. "Did you eat yet?" "No," I said. "I was waiting." "Good." He swiped his thumb across the screen, probably checking his Venmo balance. "We'll eat together." We sat down at the kitchen table 10 minutes later. The chicken was dry. I didn't care. I watched him eat. I watched the way he chewed, methodical, efficient. He didn't know I had screenshots of his crimes on my iPhone, charging silently on the counter. He didn't know I had seen the ledger. He thought he was the smartest. person in the room. That's the thing about sociopaths. They always underestimate the people they dismiss as background noise. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His skin was warm. His thumb stroked my knuckles. A year ago, this gesture would have made me feel safe. Now, I wanted to vomit. I wanted to pull my hand back and sanitize it with industrial bleach. "You're quiet tonight," he said, tilting his head. "Everything okay at school?" I looked at him. I looked into the eyes of the man who had written a script, calling me a cold, abusive shrew to strangers on the internet. I looked at the man who had weaponized our anniversary as a pin code for his criminal enterprise. I smiled. It was a genuine smile, because I held the power now. I held the axe. "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." He took a bite of green beans. "What did you do all day? Did you get any grading done?" I pulled my hand out from under his and picked up my fork. The metal felt cold and heavy. I looked him right in the eye. And I lied, committing the perjury of our marriage with perfect precision. "Just graded papers." I told him I was just grading papers. That was the lie that started the end. He bought it too. He nodded, swallowed a mouthful of chicken, and said, "Don't stay up too late, honey." Just like that, as if he wasn't currently robbing pensioners blind from the kitchen table. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the screenshots I'd taken, the crypto wallet ID, the Venmo history, the photo of me in the straw hat that he'd sent to Martha with the caption, "She's never understood my dreams." I felt physically ill. The room smelled like his cedar cologne, and suddenly that scent made me want to retch. I couldn't stay here. Not tonight. Not with him breathing the same air. I called Zora. She picked up on the first ring. "You okay?" she asked. "No," I whispered. "I'm not. You were right. The psychic was right. I have the evidence, Zora. It's bad. It's federal bad." She didn't ask questions. She just said, "I'm coming." She was at my house in 20 minutes. I threw clothes into a duffel bag, underwear, a fresh blouse, my toothbrush. I didn't bother folding. I grabbed the AP history essays I actually needed to grade because that mundane task felt like a lifeline. I left the burner phone in the toolbox exactly where I found it. I wasn't ready for that confrontation yet. When Zora pulled into the driveway, I slipped out the side door like a teenager breaking curfew. For 10 minutes, just breathing, before I made the second call. I dialed the non-emergency line for Sandy Springs Police Department. The dispatcher picked up. "Sandy Springs PD, what's your emergency?" "This isn't an emergency," I said, my voice sounding like someone else's. "But I need to speak with a detective regarding a federal crime. Wire fraud, romance, scams." I remember watching the front door, waiting for the porch light to flicker, waiting for him to come out. "And you're the victim?" she asked. That's when it hit me. I wasn't the victim. I was the accessory. "No," I said, "I'm the wife." The call lasted 14 minutes. I explained everything, the burner phone, the scripts, the photos of me he used. I told them I had digital evidence, screenshots, crypto wallet IDs, and Venmo transactions totaling nearly $200,000. The dispatcher transferred me to a detective in the financial crimes unit. He was calm, methodical. He told me not to touch anything else, not to confront Desmond, and to stay somewhere safe for the night. "We'll need to get the FBI involved," he said. "This crosses state lines. We'll have someone at your house first thing." First thing in the morning? That meant I had to get through tonight. I ended the call and looked at Zora. "They'll be there at dawn with the FBI." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're doing the right thing, Paloma." I nodded, but I couldn't stop thinking about the timeline. 10 hours until the world knew. But in that moment, sitting in my sister's car, all I could think about was what I had to do next. I had to go back in there. I had to sleep next to him. I had to pretend everything was normal. I walked back into that house, past the kitchen where the lasagna was congealing in the pan, up the stairs. He was already asleep, lying on his back, snoring softly. I changed into my pajamas and slid into bed beside him. I stared at the ceiling for hours, listening to him breathe, wondering how I ever loved a man who could do something so predatory. The police said they'd be there in the morning with the FBI. He was asleep next to me. 5:58 a.m. The silence in Zora's Honda Civic was heavy, thick like the humidity before a thunderstorm in Georgia. I was sitting in the passenger seat, my legs crossed, bouncing my foot like I was waiting for the dismissal bell to ring. The air inside the car was stale, smelling of Zora's vanilla vape smoke and the cold dregs of an iced oat milk latte. We were parked under a massive oak tree, 3 houses down from the life I used to have. The house looked normal, perfect even. The mulch was fresh, the American flag was up. It was the kind of house you see on a postcard for suburban bliss. But I knew what was inside. I knew the rot in the foundation. I looked at my phone screen. The Nest app was open. The live feed of the front porch was grainy in the pre-dawn gray. I whispered to Zora, "They're late." She didn't take her eyes off the rearview mirror. She just said, "Traffic on 285 is probably a nightmare, even for the feds." I snorted, a dry, humorless sound. 5:59 a.m. I watched the seconds tick by on the digital clock. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath. I was Principal Vreeland again, waiting for the disruption. 6 a.m. on the dot. The doorbell rang. You know that sound? That sharp electronic trill that demands attention? On the screen, I saw Desmond shift. He was walking down the hallway, wearing that ratty navy blue bathrobe. The one with the loose thread on the pocket I kept meaning to clip. He looked relaxed, probably assuming it was the UPS guy dropping off a package. Or maybe he thought it was me coming home early, because I forgot my keys. Spoiler alert, I had my keys. I watched him reach for the knob. He unlocked the deadbolt. Click, he opened the door. And then the ram. It wasn't a dramatic movie boom. It was a sickening crunch of wood and glass. The door flew inward, slamming against the wall, and I swear I felt the vibration in my chest from 3 houses away. The feed shook for a second. Then the flood. Men in tactical vests pouring into the foyer like black water. Federal warrant. Get on the ground. Hands where I can see them. The audio on the feed clipped from the sheer volume of it. It was chaos. It was violent. It was the ugliest thing I had ever seen, and I couldn't look away. Desmond didn't go down immediately, I'll give him that. He stood his ground for a second, hands up. Looking like he was trying to negotiate a budget cut with the school board, he looked bewildered. Genuinely confused. Like he couldn't understand why his carefully constructed syllabus was being rejected. I saw his mouth moving. Likely saying there's been a mistake, or I can't explain. But there's no explanation for stealing $200,000 from grandmothers. Desmond! That doesn't track. 2 agents grabbed him by the arms, yanking him forward. The bathrobe flopped open, revealing his ridiculous pajama pants. They spun him around and slammed him against the wall. Hard. I saw his face press against the hallway paint, that grige color we spent 3 hours arguing about at Sherwin-Williams. His cheek was squished flat. His eyes were wide. Darting around, he looked for me. I swear he looked right at the camera, looking for the woman who usually fixes things. But I wasn't there. And then, the cuffs. Silver. Cold. Click. They pulled him away from the wall. His hands were locked behind his back. He looked small, diminished. The master manipulator, reduced to a perp in pajamas. They marched him toward the door. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was shuffling, barefoot on the hardwood. It was pathetic. It was poetic justice. They led him out under the porch. The sun was just starting to crest over the roofline, hitting him in the face. He winced at the light. I zoomed in on my phone, capturing the image, the trust marker for the final chapter. The neighbor's curtains were twitching now. The suburban bubble was popping. They walked him down the driveway. He stumbled a little on the second step, and one of the agents grabbed his arm to keep him from falling, not to help him, just to keep the asset moving. They were headed for the unmarked sedan parked at the curb. Right before they bent his head to shove him into the back seat, Desmond stopped. He planted his feet. He turned his head. He looked straight down the street, right at Zora's car. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Did he see us? Was the sun reflecting off the windshield? Or was he just looking at the house, trying to memorize it one last time? His face was blank. No anger, no sadness, just empty. A hard drive that had been wiped. I felt a wave of nausea, then a cold, clean wash of something else. Finality. It was over. The ledger was balanced. The audit was complete. I didn't hide. I didn't duck. I just looked at him through the glass, and I lifted my hand. A slow, deliberate wave. Goodbye. He stared for another second, and then they forced him into the dark interior of the car. The door slammed shut, and just like that, the man I married for 20 years was gone. They kept me in a waiting area that smelled like floor wax and cheap coffee. That specific scent of administrative anxiety that I know so well from the principal's office. I was sitting there for 3 hours, staring at a community safety flyer about locking your doors, when Detective Miller finally came out. He looked exhausted, like he'd been awake as long as I had. He held a styrofoam cup in one hand and a thick file in the other. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me with that mix of pity and professional curiosity that I absolutely despise. Then he dropped the news. He's asking for you. He says he won't sign the confession unless you hear him out. I needed a minute to process the data. A confession? Already? It had only been 4 hours since they hauled him out of the driveway in his bathrobe. But apparently, once they showed him the screenshots I took, the Venmo transfers, the scripts, the crypto wallet ID, his whole narrative collapsed. It didn't just crumble, it evaporated. I agreed to go in, mostly because I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the moment the mask finally came off. They buzzed me through the heavy steel door, that hollow metallic clang echoing down the hallway like a gavel striking a bench. The interrogation room was freezing. Aggressively cold. The fluorescent lights were buzzing overhead, a low, headache-inducing hum that made my teeth hurt. And there he was. Desmond! Sitting at a metal table, shackled to a ring on the floor, he looked small. That was my first thought. Without the Italian suits, without the carefully groomed beard, without the posture of a man who owns the room, he just looked frail and incredibly ordinary. When he saw me, his eyes lit up with this terrifying spark of hope. He leaned forward, chains rattling, and he gave me this look. The same look he used to give me when he'd forgotten our anniversary and tried to smooth it over with flowers. Paloma, he whispered. Thank God. You have to tell them. This is all a misunderstanding. It's for us. It was always for us. This is all a misunderstanding. It's for us. It was always for us. I didn't sit down. I just stood there, gripping the back of the metal chair so hard my knuckles turned white. I looked at the one-way mirror, wondering how many agents were on the other side, watching this performance. Because that's what it was, a performance. He was still trying to run the script. I said, Desmond, stop. Just stop. I have the texts. I have the photos of me sent to Martha. I know about the Dubai contract. I know it never existed. He flinched. Actually flinched, like I'd slapped him. Then the tears started, not quiet, dignified tears. Ugly, heaving sobs that made his whole body shake. He put his head in his hands and started rambling about the market, about liquidity, about how the school pension wasn't enough to send our kids to college without debt. He said he was trying to be a hero. He used that exact word. I was trying to secure our legacy, Paloma. I was playing the long game. These women, they have money they don't need. It was just a redistribution of assets. I was going to pay it back. I swear, once the big contract cleared, I was going to pay every penny back. He looked up at me, eyes red and swollen, pleading for validation. He wanted me to nod. He wanted me to tell him he was a good man who made a few bad mistakes. He wanted the principal to let him off with a warning, but I just felt cold. I looked at the man I'd slept next to for 20 years, the man I cooked dinner for, the man I trusted with my life, and I realized I didn't know him at all. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a misunderstood provider. He was a predator who targeted lonely women and weaponized my image to do it. He stole Dorothy's vacation money. He stole Martha's grandkids' inheritance. And he had the audacity to sit there and call it redistribution. The disgust rose in my throat, tasting like bile. I realized then that the pity I felt was gone. There was no room for it. He looked at me, waiting for absolution. I leaned over the table, getting right in his face, close enough to smell the stale coffee on his breath. I told him, "You didn't do it to be a hero, Desmond." I pulled my hand away from the chair and stood up straight, smoothing my shirt, ready to walk out of that room. and leave him in the dark. I said, "You're just a thief." And I walked out, leaving him to his silence. That interrogation room smelled like industrial floor wax and stale fear, a combination I'm never going to forget. When I walked out, leaving Desmond in that metal chair, I felt like I'd just conducted a firing squad, but nobody was dead. Not yet. But the life I knew, the one with the 2-car garage and the weekly landscaping, that was gone. I needed a minute to process the data. Detective Miller handed me a stack of papers before I left the precinct. Financial affidavits, asset freezes. It turns out that when you steal $200,000 from grandmothers, the state doesn't just send a strongly worded letter. They come for your house. I drove back to Sandy Springs, staring at the oak trees lining Roswell Road, and I realized I wasn't going home. I was going to a crime scene that still had a mortgage attached to it. The front door was still held together by plywood from the raid. The lock was shattered. I walked in, and the silence was louder than the sirens had been at 6 a.m. I sat down at the island in the kitchen, the same granite countertop where Desmond used to peel grapefruits for me, and I opened my laptop. I had an email from the district attorney's office. The subject line read, "Pre-trial Zoom, State versus D, V-Reland victim impact." Statement, that doesn't track. Victims? I mean, I knew there were victims, but seeing it in a calendar invite for a Tuesday at 2 p.m. made it feel like a PTA meeting I hadn't prepared for. I logged in early because that's who I am. I'm the principal who shows up before the bell. The black squares on the screen started filling up. Names like Martha 1952 and Sunshine Dram popped up, but then the cameras turned on and I saw faces, real faces. There was Martha. She looked exactly like her profile picture, gray hair, a floral cardigan, sitting in what looked like a sunroom in Ohio. And then there was Dorothy. She was wearing large, oversized glasses and a bright pink t-shirt. She looked so kind. She looked like someone who would bake you cookies if you moved in next door. And then there were others. 25 of them. 25 women who had trusted a man named Desmond who told them he was trapped in a loveless marriage in Dubai. The DA muted everyone to give the standard legal disclaimer about restitution. My stomach dropped. Restitution. Desmond had spent every penny. The crypto wallet was empty. He had gambled it away on margin trades that didn't exist. The only asset left was the house, our house, the cedar chest, the red toolbox in the garage. All they had to be liquidated to pay back the money he stole to feed his ego. I'm not gonna lie, I sat there on that bar stool and ugly cried for 40 minutes. I wasn't crying for Desmond. I was crying because I realized I was the collateral damage in a war I didn't even know we were fighting. When the unmuted portion of the call started, the DA asked if anyone wanted to speak. A voice came through the speakers. It was Dorothy. Her voice was shaky, thick with a southern accent that sounded just like home. She said, "I just want to know, did he ever love me? Or was I just a line item in a ledger?" The question hung in the air like humidity. I looked at her face on the screen, searching for anger, but all I saw was heartbreak. I felt a hand squeeze my chest, right where my heart used to be safe. I unmuted my microphone. My voice cracked when I said, "I am so sorry." I said it to Martha. I said it to Dorothy. I said it to 25 strangers whose lives my husband had dismantled because he wanted to feel like a big man. I wasn't the criminal, but in that moment, I felt the weight of his sins like a heavy wet wool blanket. And that's when I knew the fight wasn't over. Selling the house was just the beginning. I had to answer them. I had to find the words to explain a monster that I slept next to for 20 years, and I didn't have them. Not yet. Not yet. So the Zoom call ended. The screen went black, and all I could hear was the hum of the refrigerator in this temporary apartment. That's what they call it. Temporary. Like the grief. Like the shock. It's a 1-bedroom box above a dry cleaner on Roswell Road. The air smells like bleach and fabric softener, which is ironic, considering I'm trying to wash a man out of my life. I've been sitting here staring at the stacks of cardboard boxes. The moving company came yesterday. They took the mahogany bed, the cedar chest. Yeah, the innocent one, and even that damn red toolbox. It's all gone, sealed up in a truck headed for an auction house. To pay off the attorneys. It's strange what you hold on to when the floor drops out. I kept a coffee mug. A chipped Williams-Sonoma mug. Desmond bought it for me on our first anniversary. Or maybe he bought it with a stolen credit card from Eileen, Insker Atlanta. Who knows? That's the thing that keeps me up at 2 a.m., not the money. I can make money. I'm a principal, for crying out loud. I know how to budget. No, it's the emotional ledger, the audit of the heart. I've been asking myself the same question. You're probably asking, did he ever love me? Did he love any of them? My brain keeps going back to this memory. Years ago, we were at the theater at the Avenue. It was some loud, mindless action movie. The theater was freezing. You know that chill, the artificial AC cold that settles in your bones. Desmond was sitting there, bucket of popcorn balanced on his lap, and he reached over and took my hand. Just like that, intertwined our fingers. I remember feeling this rush. I thought, he needs me. He's grounding himself in me. I thought it was love. But looking at it now, through the lens of the police reports and the scripts, that doesn't track. I don't think he was holding my hand for comfort. I think he was checking my pulse, literally or metaphorically. He was checking to see if I was still buying the performance. He was calibrating his instrument. Me, I wasn't his wife. I was a prop in his one-man show. I was the trust marker that made him look like a solid suburban family man. It makes me think of Celeste. That psychic at the fair. The heat, the smell of funnel cakes and hay. She told me there was a voice hidden in the red chest. She was right, of course. But I was looking for a person. I was looking for a mistress. I was looking for a mistress. I was looking for Eileen. But the voice wasn't a woman. The voice was the algorithm. It was the script unsker Martha unsker final file. It was the calculated manipulation. The voice was just Desmond's own ego bouncing around inside a metal box, echoing back to him how brilliant he was. He didn't love Martha. He didn't love Dorothy. And he certainly didn't love me. He loved the game. He loved the game. He loved the control. He loved the ROI, the return on investment. The return on investment. When he looked at me, he didn't see a partner. He saw cover. He saw a plausible deniability. He saw the woman who would make the lasagna and grade the papers so he could sit in the garage and spin lies about Dubai contracts. It's a horrifying realization, truly, to realize that your entire marriage was just overhead, just a business expense and a criminal enterprise. I tried to explain this on the call. I tried to apologize. But you know what? I'm done apologizing for his pathology. I looked at those women on the screen, 25 of them, and I saw the relief in their eyes when I said it was a scam. But I also saw the hurt. They wanted the connection to be real. They wanted the man in the photos to be real. And I realized something. The only person Desmond ever loved was the reflection in the mirror. The only thing he cared about was winning. So when the call ended, when Dorothy asked me one last time, did he mean it when he said he cared? I didn't hedge. I didn't use principal speak. I didn't say, let's table that. I looked right into the camera lens and I told Dorothy the truth. He only loves himself. People always ask if the sentencing felt like justice. You know, like a season finale of Law & Order, where the music swells and the bad guy gets dragged off in slow motion. Let me tell you something about the Fulton County Courthouse. It smells like floor wax and bad coffee. There is no swelling music. There is just the hum of an industrial air conditioner that is working way too hard to cool down a room full of anxious people. Desmond took the plea deal. The state offered him 5 years. If he went to trial facing a jury and 25 victims testifying, he was looking at 20. I know Desmond. I know his brain. He looked at that math. 20 years of overhead versus 5 years of a correctional period, and he took the deal. It was purely transactional. He didn't plead guilty because he was remorseful. He pleaded guilty because the statistics didn't favor a trial. The judge asked the standard questions. Do you understand the charges? Yes. Do you admit to the acts? Yes. Then the gavel came down. Bang! Just like that. It wasn't a thunderclap. It was just a heavy wooden block hitting a piece of wood. It sounded like a door slamming shut. Numbness. That's the only word for it. I just sat there, staring at the back of Desmond's neck, trying to reconcile this man in the cheap, ill-fitting suit with the husband who used to make pancakes on Sundays. I saw the news headline later that afternoon on my phone, sitting on a bench outside the courthouse. I was just scrolling to keep my hands busy. The article was from the local patch. It read, Sandy Springs man sentenced in romance scam scheme. Just a blurb. A few paragraphs. It made 25 victims and $200,000 feel small, like a clerical error. And then my brain flashed back to that stupid Alienware laptop, the one with the glowing RGB lights on the back that looked like a UFO. I remembered him bringing it home in the box, so excited. He told me, Paloma, I need a hobby. I'm gonna get into PC gaming. This is a high-performance rig. I rolled my eyes. I thought it was a midlife crisis purchase. I thought he was gonna play World of Warcraft or Fortnite. But sitting in that courtroom listening to the prosecutor list the equipment seized, I realized the truth. That laptop wasn't for games. It was the engine room. That high-performance rig was running 3 VPNs at once, masking his IP address, hosting the databases of fake identities. He was sitting on the couch next to me, bathed in the glow of that alien head, stealing retirement funds from grandmothers while I graded papers on the Louisiana Purchase. It's sickening when you realize the tech you bought him was the weapon he used to gut other people's lives. When they stood him up to take him away, the shackles made this specific sound. Clank, clank. Heavy metal on metal. It cuts through a courtroom silence like a knife. He paused. He turned his head to the left, toward the gallery where I was sitting with Zora. He didn't look afraid. He looked performative. He mouthed the words, I'm sorry. Just 2 words. No sound behind them. You want to know what I did? Did I cry? Did I shout, I hate you? No, I didn't do anything. I just sat there. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out all the organs and left just the shell. I realized that apology wasn't for me, and it wasn't for the victims. It was for him. It was his closing statement, his final attempt to be the protagonist in his own tragedy. And I wasn't buying it. I looked right through him. I checked my watch. I needed a minute to process the data, but mostly I just wanted to go home. If you can call that temporary apartment with the bleach smell home. It was over. But the damage? That was permanent. It's been exactly 1 year and 3 days since the gavel dropped in Fulton County. 5 years for Desmond. That was the math. That was the sentence. And I know I told you last time that I was sitting outside the courthouse feeling hollow, just wanting to go home. But the truth is, home didn't exist anymore. The house in Sandy Springs is just a sold listing on Zillow now. A 3-bedroom colonial where a stranger is sleeping in my master suite. I'm in an apartment off Roswell Road, smaller, with thinner walls and a landlord who takes 3 days to fix the AC. But it's mine. It's clean. There are no red toolboxes in the garage, so I thought I was doing better. I really did. I thought the data was processed, the file was closed, and I could move on to the next curriculum unit. But grief, or trauma, or whatever you want to call the after effects of living with a ghost for 20 years, it doesn't follow a syllabus. It doesn't care about your lesson plan. It hits you on a Tuesday afternoon when you least expect it. Zora called me last week. She said, we need to get out. We need to go somewhere loud. So we went back to the North Georgia State Fair. It felt like walking into a memory I didn't want to access. The air was thick, that specific Georgia humidity that smells like funnel cake, livestock, and diesel fuel. The noise was a physical assault screams from the tilt-a-whirl, the twang of country music from the speakers, the sound of 1,000 people pretending to be having a nice time. I was gripping my iced tea so hard, the condensation was dripping down my arm. I kept my sunglasses on even though the sun was dipping behind the trees. I didn't want to make eye contact. I didn't want to see anyone who might have known us, who might have known him. Zora was dragging me toward the midway, trying to get me to play a rigged carnival game, but I stopped. My feet just planted themselves into the gravel. About 50 yards ahead, past the deep-fried Oreo stand, I saw it. That same purple banner fluttering in the wind. Celeste, intuitive readings. I hadn't planned this. I swear to you I didn't. But my body moved on its own. I told Zora I needed a minute. I walked toward the tent. My heart was doing that thing where it hammers against your ribs like a trapped bird. The closer I got, the more the scenery changed. The smell of popcorn faded, replaced by the scent of sage and cheap incense. The fairy lights were strung up just like I remembered, chaotic, warm, unscripted. I stood at the entrance. The flap was open, and there she was, Celeste. It's been 2 years since I sat in that chair, and she told me about the voice in the red chest. 2 years since she laughed that dry, crackling laugh. But looking at her now, God, she looked older. Her skin seemed thinner, draped over her bones like paper. The purple scarf she wore back then was gone, replaced by a gray knit shawl that looked too heavy for the weather. She was shivering. The atmosphere wasn't mystical anymore. It was just sad. It was just a woman in a tent at a county fair trying to scrape by. I hesitated. I should have turned around. I should have gone back to Zora and won a cheap stuffed animal. But I needed to know. I needed to know if she remembered, if she saw the chaos she had unleashed, or if I was just another transaction in her ledger. I took a breath, I swallowed the lump in my throat, and I walked in. I sat down across from her. The folding chair creaked under my weight. She didn't look up at first. She was busy arranging a deck of tarot cards, her fingers moving slowly, deliberately. I waited. The air was thick with silence. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes were cloudy, cataracts forming in the corners, but there was a sharpness there too. She looked right at my face. She scanned it. She looked at the lines around my mouth, the tiredness in my eyes. And then she smiled. But it wasn't a smile of recognition. It was polite. It was professional. It was the smile you give a stranger. I looked at her, really looked at her, trying to find a trace of the mystical conduit she pretended to be. The last time I sat in this folding chair, but mostly, I just saw a tired woman in a gray knit shawl who probably needed an air conditioner as much as I did. The air in that tent was thick, smelling like incense and old dust. I could hear the muffled screams of people on the tilt-a-whirl outside. It was claustrophobic. It was deceptive, and yet I didn't move. I reached into my purse, my new smaller purse that doesn't have room for burner phones or lies, and pulled out a $20 bill. It was crisp, the way money used to be before I had to spend every penny on defense attorneys. I slid it across the little table. The tablecloth was that crushed velvet that grabs at your skin, and I remember thinking how much I hated that texture. I still do. Yes, I said, I would like a reading. She nodded. That slow, deliberate nod people use when they want you to think they're processing cosmic vibrations instead of just counting their cash. She reached out and took my hand. Her skin was dry, paper dry, and cool. It felt grounding. For a woman who talks to spirits, she felt incredibly physical. I stared at our hands expecting, I don't know what, lightning? A replay of a nightmare? Part of me was waiting for her to say, "There is a red chest in your garage." I wanted her to say it. I wanted the validation that the specific horrors of the last 2 years were written in the stars, not just a result of my own blindness. But she didn't say that. She closed her eyes. She was quiet for a long time. The silence stretched out, heavy and humid. I found myself holding my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The way I did every time my phone buzzed for a year. I was waiting for the data to come back corrupted. Finally, she opened her eyes and looked right at me. Not through me, at me. She squeezed my hand, just a little pressure, and she said, "You survived the storm." I blinked. That doesn't track, right? That's fake. That's the kind of platitude you find in a greeting card in the checkout aisle at Target. I wanted specifics. I wanted the audit of my life. And then she tilted her head, like she was listening to a frequency I couldn't hear. And she added, "The voice is gone." My chest. It just unlocked. You know that feeling when you've been carrying a backpack that's too heavy for miles and you finally take it off? And you realize how light your shoulders actually are? That was it. The voice. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a mistress. It was the algorithm in his notes app. It was the scripts, the flow charts, the calculated manipulation of lonely women. It was the narrative he constructed where he was the victim and I was the villain. And she was telling me it was gone. I looked around the tent, at the fairy lights strung up near the ceiling, at the deck of tarot cards resting on the table. The noise of the fair, the deep fryers, the screaming teenagers, the carnival music had all faded into the background. It was just white noise. "Yeah," I whispered. "It is." She let go of my hand and smiled, just the small, weary curve of her lips. She didn't know about Desmond. She didn't know about the Craftsman toolbox or the crypto wallet. She probably didn't even remember me from 2 years ago. But she was right. The chaos was over. The investigation was closed. The sentencing was done. I walked out of that tent and didn't look back at the purple banner. I just walked into the sunlight. I knew she was right. The silence was finally real. It is 2 a.m. again. I seem to be drawn to this hour like a moth to a flame, or maybe just an insomniac principal to a digital clock. But this time the setting is different. I am sitting on my balcony. It's a standard issue concrete slab in a high-rise off Roswell Road. Not the big house in Sandy Springs with the rolling lawn and the garage of horrors. It's smaller, much smaller. But the deadbolt works, and I have the only key. That's a syllabus requirement I take seriously these days. I still check the lock twice, 3 times if it's raining. Desmond isn't here. Obviously, he's in a federal facility in Jesup, Georgia, processing his own data, but the habit, that's the kind of conditioning that takes years to unlearn. I told my therapist it's just heightened situational awareness. She told me it's trauma. We tabled that discussion. I am drinking tea now. Not wine. Wine makes the memories too fluid. Tea keeps me grounded. I can hear the hum of traffic on the interstate. It sounds like static, like white noise. It's better than the silence of that kitchen. The silence that used to scream at me. I went on a date last week. His name was David. He's an actuary. He calculates risk for a living. Ironic, right? I spent 20 years married to the biggest risk factor in the tri-state area. And now I'm dating a man who spends his life mitigating it. We went to that Italian place near the avenue. He ordered the chicken piccata. I had the salmon. It was fine. It was aggressively normal. He didn't ask about my financial portfolio. He didn't ask if I had access to a crypto wallet. He asked if I liked hiking. I wanted to cry right there at the table. Hiking. Just hiking, imagine that. I didn't tell him about the nightmares, though. I still have them. The garage door opening. The pale yellow light cutting through the darkness. The sound of the drawer opening. I wake up with my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands shake. I have to remind myself that the red toolbox is gone, the cedar chest is gone, the house is sold. A stranger is sleeping in my old bed. I bought a rug for this condo. It's bright yellow, obnoxiously sunny. Desmond would have hated it. He would have said it clashed with the aesthetic. He would have said it was too loud. I say it clashes with the darkness, and that is exactly the point. I need the noise. I need the color. I'm teaching again. Full time. The kids don't know the details, of course. They just see Principal Vreeland. But I'm different. I'm harder, maybe. I'm stricter. But when a student comes to me with a lie, I can see it. I can smell it. It's like a specific scent of rotten fruit. I don't let it slide. That doesn't track, I tell them. And we wait for the truth. So I'm sitting here watching the Atlanta skyline blink in the humidity. The air is thick, heavy like a wet blanket. It's Georgia in late summer, and it's miserable and beautiful all at once. I look at the Bank of America Plaza glowing in the distance, that giant, jagged pencil of light stabbing the sky. And for the first time in 2 years, I don't feel like a supporting character in my own life. I don't feel like a prop in someone else's grift. I am Paloma again, not just Desmond's wife. So, here we are. The final bell, so to speak. I look at the camera lens and I see all of you. I see the skepticism. I see the hesitation. I know exactly what you're thinking because 2 years ago, I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through Netflix, thinking psychic readings were for people who didn't understand probability. I thought I was too smart to be scanned. I was a high school principal, for crying out loud. I dealt with lying teenagers every single day. I thought I could spot a con from a mile away. But here's the thing about a good con artist. They don't wear masks. They don't twirl their mustaches. They look just like your husband. They look just like the guy who mows his lawn on Saturdays and remembers to put the seat down. That is the horror. That is the thing that keeps me up at night. Even now, it wasn't a stranger in a dark alley. It was Desmond. It was the man I shared a bed with for 20 years. I want to go back to that moment in the tent with Celeste. I want to go back and shake myself by the shoulders. When she said there was a voice in the red chest, I laughed. I dismissed it. But you know what? She wasn't wrong. The voice was there. It just wasn't a ghost. It was the silent, calculating hum of a burner phone vibrating against the metal of a toolbox. And that is my warning to you. If something feels off, it is off. That doesn't track. That is the phrase I used to say when the numbers didn't add up. But you have to listen to that feeling. You have to. If your partner starts guarding their phone like it contains nuclear launch codes, ask why. If they tell you you're crazy for asking questions, that is gaslighting 101. That is chapter 1 of the syllabus for abusers and liars. I spent months telling myself I was overreacting. I told myself I was being hysterical. Do not do that. You are not hysterical, you are a radar. You are a detection system, and you need to trust your own gut. I found the phone because I stopped listening to his excuses and I started looking for the evidence. I looked in the red chest, and it broke my heart. It shattered my life into a million pieces that I am still picking up. But I would rather know the truth and live in an apartment on Roswell Road than live in that big house on the hill and be married to a stranger. I am Paloma Rayland. I am not a victim. I am a survivor. And I am telling you, if someone tells you to look in the red chest, look.